Good day. This time we will discuss the Spain and the Habsburg Empire. Let us first know where is Spain located. The Kingdom of Spain is located in the Iberian Peninsula in southwestern Europe, particularly at 40.4637 degrees north and 3.7492 degrees west. Spain has a total area of 194,898 square miles, including the Balearic Islands in the Mediterranean, the Canary Islands in the Atlantic, and the Moroccan enclaves of Ceuta and Melilla. Spain covers 85% of the Iberian Peninsula, extending south from the Pyrenees Mountains to the Strait of Gibraltar, which connects Spain to Africa. So, what are the prominent features of the Iberian Peninsula? The Iberian Peninsula, which includes the current countries of Spain and Portugal, is a landmass that is bounded by the Atlantic Ocean on the west, the Strait of Gibraltar on the south, the Bay of Biscay on the north, and the Mediterranean Sea on the southeast and east. Strabo, the Greek geographer, had regarded the peculiar topography of the Iberian Peninsula to be a bull's hide spread out at Europe's southernmost tip 500 years before. Yet, while the peninsula's exterior limits are impressively evident, with much of the perimeter enclosed by sea, the physical topography of the core is far from it. While looking at the map of the peninsula, two features stand out. The first is its sheer vastness at over 580,000 square kilometers, of which contemporary Spain occupies around 85%. Iberia is over twice the size of the British Isles. Second, its altitude. After Switzerland, this is Europe's highest area. Moreover, the wide, dry tableland known as the meseta sits in the heart of the peninsula, encompassing nearly one half the entire surface. The meseta is divided by the encroaching sierras of the central system, the Serra de Estrella, the Sierra de Gregos, and the Sierra de Guadarrama, and surrounded by a sequence of other tremendous mountain barriers, the Cantabrian Cordillera to the north, the Iberian Mountains to the northeast, and the Sierra Morena and the Cordillera Betica to the south. The peninsula's climate is as diverse as its physical topography. The northern and northern western coastal areas, from central Portugal to the Pyrenees, have a moderate Atlantic climate with considerable rainfall. The remainder of the peninsula is semi-arid. Drought is all too prevalent. The northern Meseta sees extreme climate differences, with extremely cold winters followed by scorching summers. Additionally, Spain's geographical convulsions and stark variations in temperature and vegetation have significantly affected the country's political, economic, and cultural evolution, endowing the peninsula with astounding regional diversity. So, what brought Spain to the Philippines? The Habsburgs were certain that they were born to dominate. From 1273 through 1918, Habsburg sons and even a few women controlled territories in the heart of Europe. From England to Serbia, Portugal to Poland, the dynasty's dominions expanded even further in the early modern period, embracing practically all of Americas as well as lands in Africa and Asia. Not satisfied with their complete monopoly on the greatest crown in the West, the Holy Roman Empire, the Habsburg monarchs up to the 17th century sincerely thought it was their destiny to control the universal orb to dominate every corner of the globe as possible. However, an aspect in which the dynasty had to adjust during their reign was overseeing a vastly expanded range of kingdoms. The distances across Habsburg's domains, from the New World to Spain to Austria, presented a difficulty that no contemporary monarch had ever faced. A letter from Peru to Spain, for example, may take up to 8 months to arrive. Although the problem was not insurmountable, it did serve to clarify Charles' approach toward governance. He attempted to enhance the institutions of the areas he controlled, but he never attempted to unite them all under one government. Having said that, he did oversee the construction of various facilities that would allow him to better exercise his reign over his vast territories. His and Ferdinand's chosen approach to governance was to build on existing institutions, altering them to better serve their own interests. The council system under the Spanish monarchy, for example, was introduced by Charles into the Low Countries. Throughout the monarchy, there was a council for each separate territory, for example, the Council of the Indies, as well as ones that dealt with the kingdom as a whole. These councils were mostly consultative, but they might also perform administrative tasks. While the monarch was not present, the councils interacted with the viceroys or regents, who controlled the different regions in the king's name. During their 16th century expansion into the east, the Consejo de Indias, or the Council of the Indies, commissioned explorers bearing the Spanish flag to encounter several uncharted territories. The basis of the first expedition was merely to discover western route to the rich Spice Islands, already known to exist. The second went there to attempt to establish Spanish Empire, and the third to search for and annex to the Spanish crown lands as wealthy as those claimed by and now yielded to the Portuguese. Under royal decree, Spanish colonizers eventually demarcated a broad geographical expanse of hundreds of islands into a single colony, thus coalescing large lands groups of cultural areas with varying degrees of familiarity with one another as Las Islas Filipinas. The Portuguese navigator and explorer Ferdinand Magellan headed the first Spanish foray to the Philippines when he arrived on Homonhon Island in March 1521. Roy Lopez de Villalobos, claiming this area for the future King Philip II of Spain in 1543, took possession of the islands then and named the archipelago as Las Islas Filipinas. But King Philip II also had sent out Miguel Lopez de Legazpi, who established the first permanent Spanish settlement in Cebu in 1565. The Spanish city of Manila was founded in 1571, and by the end of the 16th century, most of the coastal and lowland areas from Luzon to northern Mindanao were under Spanish control. Now, let us further discuss what is the El Consejo de Indias or the Council of the Indies. The Council of the Indies was an autonomous body that worked alongside the other royal councils of state, finance, war, and so on. It exercised the same jurisdiction over Spanish colonies in America and the Philippine Islands that the Council of Castile did within the Spanish peninsula. Ferdinand and Isabella had pushed it to a high level of significance and competence, and it had been an example for the administration of all the empire's important divisions outside the peninsula. The Council of the Indies had authority over all aspects of administration, including legislative, financial, judicial, military, religious, and commercial matters. All other authorities and tribunals were expressly banned from interfering in its business. The Iberian crown, moreover, featured two chambers, one for Spain and one for Portugal, in addition to the Consejo de Indias. These chambers were intended to advise to the New World colonies. The king appointed members of these chambers, which comprised representatives from the nobles, the church, and other prominent organizations. They convened independently to discuss and debate specific matters before presenting their recommendations to the king for approval. King Sebastian established the Portuguese chamber in 1562 with delegates from Portugal and its Atlantic territories, including Brazil. The Council of Castile, a Spanish chamber, was created in the 14th century and held jurisdiction over Spain and her American possessions. Next, let us discuss the Pax Romana. The Roman Republic had built one of antiquity's biggest empires, yet its republican institutions had proven unsuitable for the task of administering an empire. After a series of brutal civil wars, Augustus established a new government that gave birth to the Roman Empire, which enjoyed a long era of peace and prosperity between 14 and 180 AD. Throughout the first and second centuries, Roman authority brought peace and prosperity to the Mediterranean continent and most of Western Europe. During the Pax Romana, trade prospered and the provinces were well governed. Furthermore, the Romans created a magnificent succession of achievements that were passed down to successive generations inside their empire. These accomplishments were critical to the formation of Western civilization, which was mostly of regions in Europe acquired by the Romans and in which Roman culture and political ideas were progressively diffused. Furthermore, in one generation, 1486 to 1522, the two key powers of the Iberian Peninsula had expanded their dominance over the waters to encompass the whole world. The Portuguese Prince Henry the Navigator, who dedicated his life to the growth of geographical exploration and Portuguese commerce, paved the path for this unprecedented success. The discovery of Africa's west coast educated the navigators who went to the East and West Indies, and the management of trade with Africa developed the colonial systems of later years. During the last quarter of 15th century, the rising impediments to trade with the East Indies posed a large rise for the discoverer of a complete maritime route to the Spice Islands. Bartolomeo Diaz and da Gama addressed this dilemma for Portugal, but Columbus' approach, approved by Spain in 1492, unveiled a new world, the Indies of the West. The King of Portugal, eager to keep his monopoly on African and Eastern exploration, and the devout sovereigns of Spain, eager to expand their colonial empire on strong and unchallenged foundations, both petitioned the Pope for a description of their rights and validation of their claims. The world appeared to be large enough, and Pope Alexander VI allowed Ferdinand and Isabella the permission to explore and take control of any hitherto undiscovered and hidden regions of the world west of a line drawn north and south in the Atlantic Ocean. East of that line, Portugal's claims were affirmed based on their expeditions and previous Pope's awards. The papal bulls and the Pope's important position appear to have envisaged a free field for the exploration and conquering of undiscovered portions of the world, to the east for Portugal and to the west for Spain. If their paths crossed, the precedence of discovery would decide on ownership. The idea of extending the line around the world and of Spain being authorized to what could be within the hemisphere established by the demarcation line and its extension to the antipodes does not emerge until the time of Magellan, and it is then that we first encounter the notion that Pope had divided the world between Spain and Portugal like an orange.
The most spectacular change during the Renaissance, which shaped the course of history, was the opening of the world to European shipping. Propelled by the saying, gospel, gold, and glory, and supported by much improved technology, new types of ships, sailing charts and maps, and navigational instruments were made. This has caused the birth or the start of the era of the explorers. The explorers are men sent to the west by the Pope and the King to make money, wealth, and to colonize other territories. This is their way of expanding their control and power. Prince Henry the Navigator, third son of King John I, sponsors the series of remarkable voyages down to the African coast. Although he was called Prince Henry the Navigator, he never once set foot outside of his castle and only sponsored the voyages of the explorers. Now we will discuss four of the most remarkable explorers. First is Ruy Lopez de Villalobos. The first expedition to the Western Islands was commanded by Ruy Lopez de Villalobos. He came from a distinguished family in Malaga, Spain. He was the brother-in-law of the Viceroy of Spain, Antonio de Mendoza, who appointed him commander of the expedition. Under his command, 6 ships and around 370 men departed from Juan Gallego, Navidad, Mexico, on November 1, 1542. By February 2 of the following year, they reached the eastern coast of Mindanao. He was the first to make explorations of the island. It was Ruy Lopez de Villalobos who bestowed the name Filipinas upon the islands. This is in honor of the Crown Prince Felipe of Spain, afterward known as Philip of II. At Sarangani Island, Villalobos tried to set up a colony and ordered his men to plow the land and plant corn. Sarangani at that time only had minimal amount of food like rice and sago, a few hens, hogs, and 3 deers. Due to this and extreme hunger due to the lack of food supply, Villalobos' men were forced to eat all the available animals they could find, such as dogs, cats, and even rats. They also forcefully ate grubs, some unknown plants, lizards, and poisonous crabs. For this reason, Villalobos had to leave Sarangani. After involuntarily leaving Sarangani, he surrendered to the Portuguese at Amboina in the Malacu. This is where he succumbed to a malignant fever and died. 22 years after Villalobos' expedition, 4 vessels of about 350 men sailed for the Philippines from the same port of Juan Gallego in 1564. These ships were commanded by Miguel Lopez de Legazpi. He is a native from the province of Lipuzcoa and a well-known gentleman from an old and noble family. He was appointed by the Viceroy of Spain alongside Father Andres de Ordaneta to command the expedition to the west. For his expedition, Legazpi was tasked to bring back Philippine-grown spices to Mexico and to discover a return route to Mexico from the Philippines without infringing the Treaty of Zaragoza or the Portuguese demarcation line. By February 1565, Legazpi and his men reached Cebu. He had made blood compacts with Sikatuna and Sigala at the islands of Bohol. While in Cebu, Legazpi discovered a child Jesus-like image in a little pine cradle. He ordered the image to be considered sacred and be placed with all reverence in the first church that should be founded. Hence, the commencement of the settlement happened. The site of the church and the Spanish settlement were chosen, and the town was called San Miguel. In April of the same year, the town of San Miguel became the first Spanish town established in the archipelago and the pioneer permanent settlement in the Philippines. While on his way back to Navidad via the Pacific, Fray Andres de Odanita, Legazpi's chief pilot, whose expertise of the seasonal winds he had acquired with the Luesa expedition, discovered the Ordaneta Passage. This unique sea lane was subsequently used by the Manila Acapulco galleons until the 19th century. This was, without doubt, the most important mission of the Legazpi Ordaneta expedition. Next is Vasco da Gama. The man chosen by Manuel to follow up Diaz's lead was Vasco da Gama. He was born in 1460, the son of a minor official, and he must have a good record as a seaman to justify his appointment. Following Diaz's advice, da Gama traveled far west into the Atlantic from the vicinity of Sierra Leone, avoiding coastal squalls and currents, until he could pick up the westerlies that would lead him to the Cape of Good Hope. On the 8th of July 1497, da Gama left Lisbon harbor. After 3 months, he reached the African coast at St. Helena Bay, just north of Cape Town, and continued past Cape Agulhas to Mossel Bay. At Mossel Bay, Vasco da Gama continued eastwards. After seeing nothing but open sea, he sailed into the thriving port of Mozambique. There he learned that further north there were great ports where spices, pearls, and rubies were traded. Thus, da Gama secured a local pilot and pressed north. Unfortunately, the pilot was not as skillful as he thought he might be. Da Gama flogged him for mistaking the Karimba Islands as the mainland. He arrived at Mombasa, where he interrogated two Moors that made him decide it was safe to travel to the coast of Malindi, where the Sultan had welcomed him. It is also in Malindi where Vasco da Gama acquired a new pilot, a Gurahati from western India, who not only offered to guide him across the Arabian Sea, but turned out to be one of the most learned and experienced pilots of his age. With this man aboard, the Gama took his squadron east into the Indian Ocean. They were the first European ships to ever sail there. From Malindi, the Gama arrived in the port of West India called Calicut. The Gama's stay in Calicut was unsatisfactory from a trading point of view. He found it difficult to trade and dispose of his goods and to buy others. Thus, on the 29th of August 1948, the Gama decided to set sail for Portugal. However, the sail led to the death of many of his seamen. When the Gama arrived in Lisbon, he was away for more than 2 years and had sailed 24,000 nautical miles. Lastly, we have Ferdinand Magellan. Ferdinand Magellan is a Portuguese who served the Spanish royalty. In 1518, he convinced Charles V that he could find a shorter way to the Maluku by sailing westward via the Americas. As part of the Renaissance voyage in 1511 to 1512, Magallanes visited the Spice Islands. He received royal instruction to sail directly to Maluku and to bring back priceless spices. The greatest of all epics began when he sailed from Sanlúcar, Spain in 1519. He was on board ships with a crew of 235 men. Magallanes sailed around the southern tip of South America, across the vast Pacific Ocean after 98 days of sailing northwestward. On March 17, 1521, he finally reached the Philippines, specifically an island called Mactan. In Mactan, he was defeated and killed in battle in April 1521 as a consequence of his intervention in the dispute between the chiefs of Mactan, Lapu-Lapu, and Zula. His ships had to sail back to Spain. Only the smallest ship, the Victoria, was able to complete the voyage back to Spain in 1522. It arrived in Seville and was led by Juan Sebastian Delcano. Only 18 Europeans and 4 Malays survived, leaving 170 of the rest of the crew. Let us move on to the papal bulls. What are papal bulls and why are they decisive in colonial history? Papal bulls or church laws are papal laws which were made by the Pope of the Catholic Church. Although these papal bulls were made by the Pope, they aided the emperor in a lot of matters. Because of these, some decisions were made and were influenced. Papal bulls are considered decisive in colonial history for distinct reasons, such as these are what made kings engage in warfare, engage in intricate collection of territories and lands. These also serve as a trigger for the monarchs to follow their functions in the realm of royal patronage. Aside from that, papal bulls are also believed to help eliminate paganism and help kings and emperors expand their tributary states.
Now let's talk about Intercetera. With the construction of the world's first nautical school at Sagres Point in 1419 by Henry the Navigator, Portugal became the first country to apply innovation in navigation and boat building. Between 1451 and 1470, the Portuguese found and occupied all of the Azores Islands in the Atlantic, which they utilized to prepare the exploration of the Americas and the exploration of Africa's west coast. The Portuguese followed the ideal of reaching the east by an all-water route, propelled by their unwavering passion. By the 14th century, two of our daring explorers had reached the southernmost tip of Africa, and subsequently India gaining the advantage to the east wealth and spices. Spain, on the other hand, had already sent the first legitimately historic exploration in contemporary times. In October 1492, inspired by Florentine mapmaker Paolo Toscanelli's discovery of a westward sea route to India, Christopher Columbus rather touched down in Guanahani Island, and shortly thereafter on the coast of Cuba. His expedition, however, caused confusion and conflict between Spain and Portugal. So King John or João of Portugal objected, claiming that Spain was invading his sphere of influence. So Pope Alexander VI served as an intermediary between the two powers, according to a Concilio 1990 found in page 70. So in May 1493, he released the Intercetera and the Eximi Devotionis. Intercetera, dated May 3, 1493, assigns to Spain those areas in the west that have just been found or are yet to be discovered and are not under the authority of any Christian monarch. The Exime Devotionis, on the other hand, dated May 3 as well, provides to Spain the same rights in those discoveries that had previously been granted to Portugal in Africa. So these concessions are replaced by the Bull of May 4, Intercetera, which established the demarcation line and awarded to Spain those regions west and south of it that were not previously held by any Christian sovereign. So another bull dated September 25th of the same year authorized Spain as well to expand her authority over areas found to the east, including India, therefore nullifying both the demarcation line and prior agreements to Portugal. From Blair and Robertson, 2004, found in page 97. So, as shown in the illustration, the astute Portuguese, sensing the Spanish Pope's prejudice, did not willingly accept the predetermined demarcation line. Instead, they attempted to change it in order to restrict the amount of land allocated to Spanish explorers in the New World. Thus, the realms of influence of the two 15th century superpowers were finally solved by an imaginary line extending from the North and South Poles. 100 leagues from Spain, west of the Cape Verde Islands, and the regions to the east of the line were designated for Portugal, while those of the west were designated for Spain. Both nations committed to spread Christian teachings in their newly discovered areas, according to Agoncillo 1990, page 71. Moving on to the Treaty of Tordesillas. In 1494, the Treaty of Tordesillas was signed, dividing the New World into Spanish and Portuguese zones of power. Negotiators met at the little town of Tordesillas, Spain, to the north of Medina del Campo, and struck an arrangement that stretched Portuguese sovereignty 270 leagues farther west than Alexander VI Intercetera. So the treaty gave the Portuguese legal claim to a broad stretch of the Brazilian coast, which was later found by Pedro Alvarez Cabral's expedition in 1500. Another document dated April 15, 1495 outlines proper conditions for determining this border in a scientific and equitable manner. So as what was shown, this is the line of demarcation, Treaty of Tordesillas. The faithful adherence of every point of this treaty by the respective sovereigns is provided for in the most detailed terms by the commissioners, by virtue of the powers entrusted to them, and this is sworn before God, the Blessed Mary, and on the sign of the cross. The instrument must also be sanctioned by the Pope, who will be requested to endorse it through a bull in which the treaty's terms will be provided. Pope Julius II issued this confirmation in a bull on January 24, 1506. Thus, the Holy See's ultimate action in this subject is reflected by a bull of Leo X, awarded to Portugal, and it affirms all previous papal gifts of the countries in the East to the country, and awards her both past and future discoveries and conquests there and abroad. Now let's go to the Treaty of Zaragoza. So, with the disputes arising between Spain and Portugal over the ownership of the Moluccas or Spice Islands, a line of demarcation was drawn from pole to pole, this time at 297 and any half leagues east of the Maluku, which was agreed upon at the western limit of Spain's colonial ownership. The Moluccas was relinquished to Portugal by the Treaty of Zaragoza, dated April 22, 1529, and Spain retaining possession of the Philippine Islands. So this is the illustration of the Treaty of Zaragoza.
Who were the Habsburg monarchs? The beginnings of the Habsburg dynasty can be traced back to the medieval castle located above the Aare River in the Swiss canton of Aargau. The original Habsburg, also known as Hawk Castle, is the ancestral seat and origin of the Habsburg name. The first figure in the lineage is known to be Gontram the Rich, who lived in the middle 900s. He had a son named Lanzelin who owned land where the Habsburg was later built. Lanzelin's sons, Radbot and Werner, Bishop of Strasbourg, constructed the Habsburg castle in the early 11th century. Radbot and his brother Rudolf became affluent through transalpine trade and tolls, acquiring territory in Alsace, southwestern Germany, and Switzerland, before attaining proper authority and titles. Radbot's grandson, Otto II, was the first Count of Habsburg to occupy the Countship of Upper Alsace. The Habsburg later lost their ancestral seat in 1415, which was taken over by the Swiss Confederation. Having experienced setbacks such as being expelled from their homelands, the Habsburgs shifted their focus eastward to the Austrian duchies, where they progressively built up administrative institutions to reinforce their reign and status. During the 1100s, the son Rudolf established a political alliance with the Hohenstaufens, one of the most prominent European dynasties, having ruled the Holy Roman Empire for the majority of the 12th century. By the early 1200s, the Habsburg had positioned themselves as one of the wealthiest and most powerful families in southwestern Germany. It fell short in 1254 when the Hohenstaufen rule came to an end, resulting in the Interregnum, a roughly 20-year period during which the German kingship was contested between several claimants. The absence of a recognized royal authority resulted in a gradual collapse of public order, with rogue knights roaming the countryside and no king to carry out the punishment. Ultimately, in 1273, the Electoral Princess took action to resolve the situation by choosing a candidate. Rodolph von Habsburg then became King of Germany. So, who were the Habsburg monarchs? So, succeeding Rudolf were the following: Frederick III, Maximilian I, Charles V, Ferdinand I, Maximilian II, Rodolph II, Matthias, Ferdinand II, Ferdinand III, Leopold I, Joseph I, Karl VI, Maria Theresa, Joseph II, Leopold II, Franz II, Ferdinand II, Franz Joseph I, and Karl I. So Rudolph I. He was chosen because the electing princess assessed that he was rich and powerful enough to restore order in the empire, but not too rich and powerful to exceed the limitations of a monarch by interfering with the prince's authority. So arranged political marriages for his daughters and sons, marrying six daughters to high lords in Bavaria, Brandenburg, Saxony, and Hungary, and even set up a double marital arrangement in which one of Rudolf's daughters married one of Ottokar's sons, and one of Rudolf's sons married one of Ottokar's daughters. He also formed alliances by establishing relationships with imperial cities, protecting their rights while collecting tax revenue and military support from them. So, such military support was essential in one of Rudolf's prime tasks in the empire, namely to restore law and order after the breakdown of the interregnum years. Territorial acquisitions. So, the Battle of Marchfeld in 1278 led to the death of Ottokar II, King of Bohemia, and Austrian lands were assigned to the royal domain, giving rise to the name House of Austria. He also obtained other lands, including cities in southern Germany and a few in modern day Switzerland. Rudolph's achievements during his kingship, forging certain alliances, arranging political marriages, and territorial acquisitions, were to cement and further strengthen the dynasty's status and power. So, even though the Habsburg were often known as the House of Austria, their domains extended far beyond Austria. As seen in the map, it illustrates the growth of the royal domains throughout the years. So the Habsburg monarchy refers to all the lands under Habsburg rule, from the Netherlands to Austria to Transylvania. The Habsburg dynasty came to an end in 1918 with the dissolution of the Austro-Hungarian Empire following World War I. So how do the Habsburg exemplify the capabilities of society's oligarchy? Is it real democracy? Why or why not? The Habsburg were a powerful dynasty that ruled over vast territories in Europe for centuries. They were able to maintain their power and influence through a combination of military might, strategic alliances, and diplomacy. Their control over numerous lands enabled them to amass great wealth and resources, which they used to reinforce their position as rulers. Political power was concentrated in the hands of a small elite, and the vast majority of the population had little or no say in how they were governed. The Habsburg themselves were absolute monarchs, having had complete control over their territories and their subjects. There were some efforts to introduce democratic reforms during the Habsburg rule. For example, freedom of association, assembly, religion, and the press were guaranteed by law after 1867, during the reign of Franz Joseph I. However, these reforms were limited in practice. Libel and sedition laws restricted press freedom, and organizations deemed subversive by the government, which could be anything from nationalist to anarchist, could be broken up and their members jailed. This did not lead to true democracy, and the monarchy, the bureaucracy, and the military remained the fundamental core institutions.
Habsburg state-making via extractive power, coercive power, and war-making. War-making is defined by Charles Tilly, 1985, consists of a state's armed forces eradicating or neutralizing its rivals outside its borders where it demonstrates clear and consistent superiority as wielders of power. State-making, on the other hand, necessitates the eradication or subjugation of rivals living within the area that they govern. Extraction was also defined by Pili as the gathering of resources for use in state-making, war-making, and even protection. He then went on to further characterize extraction as ranging from open pillage to irregular tribute to bureaucratized taxation. However, Tilly also argued that the state's tendency to monopolize concentrated means of coercion is essential to all three functions: the state-making, war-making, and extraction, and also protection, the fourth one. So when performed effectively, each of these actions frequently facilitates the others. As a consequence of this, the state that has successfully eliminated its internal competition will have a significantly enhanced capacity to amass money, wage war, and protect its adherents. So for over 650 years, from 1273 until 1918, the Habsburgs, also known as the House of Austria, ruled territories in the geographic center of Europe. Only a handful of the continent's present-day nations were never ruled by a member of the Habsburg family. During the early modern era, the dynasty's reign extended from England to Serbia, Portugal to Poland, and beyond to nearly all of the Americas, touching territories in Africa and Asia along the way. The Habsburg emperors up until the 18th century took the vowels A, E, I, O, U as their motto, so it is a declaration that they were destined to govern the world. Further, the empire serves as an example of state building through the use of extractive power, coercive authority, and war making in a number of different ways. So, for extractive power, the Habsburg monarchs made persistent efforts to augment the financial resources of their administration. This constituted a segment of Rudolf I's protective endeavor to recapture forfeited regal territories throughout the empire. An additional prevalent strategy involved augmenting the authority to levy taxes. Rudolf IV implemented novel consumption taxes, curtailed tax exemptions for the clergy, and exercised his own authority over regional nobles to facilitate tax collection in urban areas. The tax modifications implemented by Albrecht V also resulted in a boost in revenues, thereby facilitating the fulfillment of his administration's rapidly escalating expenditures. So the Habsburg Empire relied heavily on extractive power to maintain control over its vast territories. The aforementioned activities encompass the collection of taxes, imposition of tariffs, and various forms of economic exploitation. The wealth was employed by the leaders of the empire to fund military forces, royal residences, as well as cultural and artistic patronage. An additional example pertains to the levying of charges for various actions, including the issuance of judicial rulings, entitlements, and land grants by Frederick, who was criticized by the populace and was called greedy. Despite facing resentment, the decision to raise revenue was deemed necessary due to the low tax income, as noted by Curtis, 2013, in page 74. It is noteworthy that Rudolf I also established a beneficial association with the imperial cities wherein their rights were upheld while simultaneously procuring tax revenue and military assistance from them. Nonetheless, according to Curtis, the consolidation and centralization of a dynasty's rule were often achieved through state-making processes such as the expansion of administrative apparatus and increased extraction of fiscal resources. These measures were not unique to the Habsburgs and were commonly employed by other powerful families during the same period. So for coercive power, the Habsburg Empire was recognized for its utilization of coercive power as a means of upholding its dominion. The aforementioned entailed the utilization of coercion to quell opposition and insurrection within its populace, alongside enforcement of stringent statutes and guidelines dictating conduct and societal structure. In fact, the position of military leader was a crucial aspect for many other members of the Habsburg family, starting from the initial knightly expeditions of Friedrich and Leopold and continuing on to Albert V, whose life ended while participating in a campaign, in a war, in a battle against the Turks. And throughout its history, the Habsburg Empire was engaged in military conflicts. The aforementioned encompasses a multitude of hostilities with adjacent polities, in addition to military campaigns intended to broaden its jurisdictional dominion. The military prowess of the empire was established through the compulsory enlistment of its subjects and the imposition of financial burdens such as taxes and other forms of economic subjugation to fund its military campaign. So in general, the Habsburg Empire serves as a prime example of a state making through the utilization of extractive power, coercive power, and war making tactics. The Habsburg dynasty employed these three distinct strategies to uphold its power over a diverse and often rebellious populace. However, the primary factor contributing to the Habsburg's reputation for its ascension was primarily its employment of political matrimony rather than military conquest. This was exemplified by a sequence of alliances, notably with Maximilian I, which facilitated the integration of Burgundy, Castile Aragon, and Bohemia-Hungary into the Habsburg fold over a span of 5 decades commencing in 1477. So this approach resulted in significant territorial acquisitions and strengthened diplomatic relations with other nations. Notwithstanding, this approach was not without its potential hazards, as it resulted in rival dynasties laying claim to portions of the Habsburg inheritance by means of matrimonial alliances, is exemplified by Marie Antoinette's union with the French royal house in 1770. So, in order to mitigate potential risks, the Habsburg dynasty promoted the practice of interbreeding as a means of maintaining the patrimony within their family. The utilization of these tactics enabled the empire to endure for extended period. However, they also generated profound social, economic, and political disparities that ultimately played a role in its collapse. So the phrase "let others wage war, you, happy Austria, merry" has been linked to narratives concerning the practice of consanguineous marriage within the family. Habsburg's state expansionism via the work Don Quixote and its possible influence on Jose Rizal. So the literary piece authored by Miguel de Cervantes, Don Quixote, can be interpreted as a reflection of the Habsburg Empire's situation of state expansionism during the late Renaissance era. The protagonist of the novel, Don Quixote, is portrayed as a character who suffers from delusions and possesses idealistic tendencies. So he embarks on a quest to rekindle the values of chivalry and uphold the dignity of his beloved. The mission of Don Quixote can be interpreted as a symbolic manifestation of the Habsburgs' imperialistic aspirations, which aimed to extend their dominion through military conquest and territorial acquisition. So the representation by Cervantes of Don Quixote's impractical quest and ultimate failure functions as a form of evaluation of the Habsburg Empire's ambitious territorial pursuits. Cervantes utilizes the character of Don Quixote to underscore the perils of an excessively fervent quest for authority and the imperative nature of introspection and analytical reasoning. The author posits that the Habsburgs' pursuit of power and supremacy may be misguided and led to their eventual downfall. So regarding Dr. Roseris, also it is possible that he may have been impacted by the literary works of Cervantes to some extent. Rizal's profound admiration for literature and extensive familiarity with European literary works, such as of those of Cervantes, were widely recognized. Thus, it is a big possibility that Rizal's literary works may have been influenced by Cervantes' approach and his adept use of humor as a means to unveil the societal and ruling class deficiencies. Nonetheless, it is noteworthy to mention that Rizal possessed a distinctive viewpoint regarding the predicaments confronting the Philippines and the function of colonialism in Philippine civilization. Hence, although Cervantes may have exerted an impact on Rizal's literary technique, it is improbable that he constituted the exclusive source of influence on Rizal's perspectives and concepts. That's all for our report. Thank you so much for listening.